Senator Paul, thank you for sitting down with us today and talking.
I wanted to just ask you more about your faith and your Christian walk and really get a little more personal view of you. So when we start out, would you consider yourself a born-again Christian?
Absolutely. I grew up in a Christian family, and as a teenager I made the decision to accept Jesus as my personal Savior, and I think about it every day.
Tell me a little more about that. When you say you accepted Jesus as your personal Savior, how old were you?
15.
Was it like a moment in time, or was it, did you gradually come to the faith?
I'd say there was a moment in time, but it might have had to have been repeated a couple times. It didn't always stick, and I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but it hasn't always been easy. And there's a quote by Dostoevsky that I like, and he talks about that I did not come to my Hosanna through childlike faith, but through a fiery furnace of doubt. And I think there was some of that growing up. And I would say that it's hard sometimes as a physician because we see a lot of terrible things, and it's hard to see the hand of God sometimes in horrible suffering. And physicians are privy to more of that than the ordinary people. And I've seen things that, part of when they say the Hippocratic Oath, it's about privacy. It is, but it's also about sort of the burden of seeing things that really most ordinary people don't see or wouldn't like to see.
How does that same question in faith, because I struggle with that myself. You see the hurt and the harm around the world, the wars, the suffering. How does that influence you in policy and politics?
Well, I think there truly is right and wrong. There's right and wrong in policy. There's right and wrong in behavior, and so many things, people think that everything's relative and that there is no sort of standard. And I think that's part of the problem we've gotten into, both in government, in analyzing war, and analyzing whether we need to be involved in war. And I think that's a mistake, and really kind of why we're adrift. And sometimes I'll say that I think really what ails us is sort of a sickness that we have, and maybe it's a spiritual sickness. But the important part of understanding that is also knowing that government doesn't have all the answers. And so when I talk to pastors or ministers and I say they're looking to me, I say I'm looking to you, in the sense that don't think your government has the answers to all of these things. And I'm not saying government doesn't have some of the answers, but really some of the answers need to come from the people, and also need to come from persuading people that they're taking the wrong course.
I was going to ask that question a little later, but you brought it up. What is the role of the church and the community and the parents in modern society, in your mind? I mean, to me it sometimes feels like we have sort of deferred to the government, if you will, and become complacent. How can Christians and the church and the community do better at that?
I think some of it's a misunderstanding sort of the Bill of Rights, and I think you've had a lot of people in education, progressives and otherwise, who say, well, the First Amendment is to keep, you don't want religious people in your government, but it's really the opposite. It's to keep government out of your religion. And there truly is a danger, and I tell people all the time that words are really important with trying to keep government out of your church and out of your religion, is that if we succumb to some of these just subtle changes in wording, that where we say, oh, well, your contribution to your church having tax-exempt status is a subsidy. If we admit that one small word subsidy, then we're admitting that somehow this entity government's giving money to the church, that the church should be regulated. We're really going down a path that is very, very dangerous. And so even some conservatives say deductions are a subsidy. I tell my staff we don't ever say that, because really once you say that, you're going to be acknowledging that the government should be in control of the church. And once that happens, I think it's a really dangerous territory.
There's a movement right now. There's about 1,700 churches around the country. I think even more at this point. And the ministers will get up and they'll give a political sermon once a year, and they video record it and they send it to the IRS. What are your thoughts on 501c3 and
Yeah, I'm very aware of the movement, and I encourage it, and I'm proud of people who will stand up and do it. And I think it's also important that we know that not one minister's ever been audited because of that I know of, or convincingly prosecuted for saying something. And the bottom line is a lot of things that we're talking about, you could say that they're political, but they also could be moral approval or disapproval of behavior. So these are things, if you can't say that in your church, where can you say that?
In your Value Voter speech, not in 2013, but in 2012, you mentioned the little things and taking appreciation and loving the people around you. How does your faith in your life, your family life, your marriage life, and then as a senator, how does it sort of all work together for you?
Well, I think if you don't have that foundation at home, you don't have it anywhere else, And, I've been married for, I have to remember, 24 years, and I don't want to get that wrong or I will be in trouble at home. But, without that, I think that is sort of a rock and a stabilizing force. And I think it's one of the things that we don't appreciate enough, not only fidelity, but also the family unit as something that is, we talk about, we want to pass this law and that. If we lose the structure of the family unit that's been around for tens of thousands of years, that is something that stabilizes society. And really, it's the one problem, and people don't like to hear this, but if you talk about poverty in America, it's the breakdown of the family. If you look at married family, 9% of married families live in poverty, a third of unmarried families live in poverty. The hard part is to say that without sort of casting aspersions on the single mom. I don't want to say that, but I want to say to the girl in high school who's not yet a mom, wait and get married. And I think people on both sides recognize that, but we need more of it. And my wife actually quotes Michelle Obama on this because she says to her daughter, she says, look at Beyonce. She did it in the right order. Beyonce fell in love, got married, and had children. And we need more of our leaders to actually say that. And that is something that, whether you're the spouse of a candidate or a candidate, these are important parts of, the bully pulpit doesn't have to be bully nature. It can also be that we persuade people to try to do the right thing.
Speaking of single families and the family unit, you've been a big advocate reaching out to the African American community, and you talk a lot about the disproportionate incarceration of blacks and sort of in that urban area. I think, talk to me a little bit about why you feel that is having a negative impact on the family unit.
Well, I think the thing is that some people think, oh, well, that's a really liberal idea. How are you going to say that in evangelical Christian churches or at the Republican convention? How are you going to say things like that? But I think it's absolutely consistent with my conception of Christianity. We believe in redemption. We believe that you get a second chance. And that really, we have to have laws, and people will have to be punished for behavior, particularly behavior that hurts other people. But even if we acknowledge we're going to punish people for bad behavior that hurts only themselves, it needs to be within reason. And it needs to be that we get people back into society and get them jobs. And as I've traveled around and met people who have had this, I'll meet sometimes ministers who in certain places have felony records and can't vote. One, we should let people get back to voting. And instead of all this be about, we want to prevent those people from voting or we want to do this and that, we need to be emphasizing that we want everybody to vote and we want to encourage people, even people who made mistakes, to vote. And I think a lot, if you look at crime, whether it's nonviolent crime or even violent crime, most of it is committed by young men before the age of 25. And I often joke that boys really don't have much of a brain developed till they're 25. And so we have to try to keep them stable until they kind of grow into their maturity. But some of that is giving a second chance. And I don't think I'm alone in that. One of the interviews I point out was, this was maybe 10, 15 years ago now, but it was Jerry Falwell, maybe Pat Robertson and Cal Thomas, and they were being asked about drug use, alleged drug use of a presidential candidate, and they were then asked, well, what if it was a young person in your church? What would you want to do with them? If a teenager was caught with marijuana, would you want them to be incarcerated or counseled? Every one of them, and these are conservative Christian ministers, they all said counseling. And I think that's what most normal people would say. And I'm not sure I'm for getting rid of all the laws. I think Colorado's good. We're going to find out that there really are problems with marijuana, and we're finding out some of that. And I think I try to make sure that people know that in saying these things about being reasonable about the punishment, that I don't want anybody to believe that I'm encouraging the behavior, because I think the behavior really is harmful. And people who say marijuana has no problems, I think they're wrong also. You talk to people who smoke marijuana every day, they don't do much else.
Based on a study by the Justice Policy Institute in 2010, they found that treatment for substance abuse delivered in the community yields over $18 in cost savings for every dollar spent, while incarceration yielded only 37 cents. Right. What policy changes do you advocate that would empower churches and nonprofits to help hurting people in society that are struggling?
Right. Well, I think one of the things to acknowledge is that there is a role for the church in this. And I've visited some of the teen challenge places for drug abuse. And what I like about it is they combine work. Everybody works, they live there, which helps, and you don't have any outside influences where you get trapped back in with friends using drugs. And you live in the facility, you work, but there's also a religious component to it, because really there's chemical addiction, the body's physically addicted, but there's also sort of a broken spiritual nature of these people, and I think that's part of the rehabilitation.
So switching topics a little bit, you seem to have been alone, or you seem to be pretty much alone on the war on Christianity. Why are you so passionate about that, and why are you willing to stand up by yourself to really fight that fight?
Some of the stories are just incredibly moving. You know, the story of Asia Bibi. She is in Pakistan. She's a Christian. There's not many Christians left. I have several friends of mine who were doctors in Pakistan that were Christians have gone. I mean, there used to be 4% Christians. Now it's less than 1%. It's a handful of Christians left. But her crime, according to the villagers, was she took water from a Muslim's well. And you know, they began stoning her. It was just horrific. And the police arrived, and she thought, oh, I'm safe. The police are here, and she's calling out for help. And they arrested her. And now she's on death row for blasphemy. And frankly, I've said, and I'm going to introduce this again next week in Washington, is that no American tax dollars should go to any country that persecutes Christians. So that means any country that has laws about blasphemy, has laws about apostasy, has laws about intermarriage between religions, they shouldn't get a penny of ours. Now, we can't tell them to change their rules, but we certainly should not be supporting countries and giving money to countries that are persecuting Christians.
That takes us kind of to Israel, and I know you took a trip recently to Israel. Tell me a little bit about that trip.
It was like church camp. I grew up going to church camp on a bus that seemed to break down every other trip, and what I remember most about church camp is 3 and 4 hour stints in the Stuckey's eating those pecan things and waiting for the bus to be towed and repaired and come back. So we went to Israel, and we had a big bus with a bunch of evangelical ministers, some Orthodox rabbis, and just friends. We had about 50, 60 people on this bus, and the rains came. And so we actually nicknamed our tour the Flood Tour. We thought we were in, or the Plague Tour. We thought one of the different, what was coming next, locusts, you know. So we were driving from Jerusalem up to the Sea of Galilee, and the road was washed out, completely washed out. And so we had to turn around, go all the way back, all the way up through Tel Aviv, and then we came in. And so we were all kind of punchy by the time we came in, and we were driving into the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of going down into a valley. And I told him we need to put some good music on the radio. So we put Guns N' Roses, Knocking on Heaven's Door, on as we went into the Sea of Galilee. But it was amazing. With all that rain, it was just so green around there. And one of the memories I have is we were on a boat, which sort of a replica. It's an old wooden boat going across the Sea of Galilee, and it looked like something that was from the time of Jesus. And I was kind of worried whether we were getting across because the winds were blowing, and you know how in the New Testament it talks about storms popping up out of nowhere. It was literally that way. It was kind of rainy and misty, but then we had hail. Then we had wind, and our ship is tilted completely sideways. And then we get to the other side, and we can still see the hail coming down like halfway across the lake. And then we looked back and we saw 2 complete rainbows. And we got pictures of them back across the Sea of Galilee. But it was an amazing trip. And, you know, I have great memories from that. And what really made it special is we had people, not only pastors who gave sort of little homilies or explanations of the different sites, we also had someone who would lead us in singing at the sites. And so one of my best memories was at the Garden of Gethsemane, singing How Great Thou Art in front of the Garden of Gethsemane. So.
Awesome. I was going to ask you that. Were you able to meet with any ambassadors or policy folks while you were in Israel?
I met with the mayor of Jerusalem. I met with the Prime Minister Netanyahu. Met with the President Perez. And then I went across the river and met with King Abdullah of Jordan, and then also met with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader.
And just on that note, what are your feelings on the Israel-American relationship, and how do we keep that?
Well, I kind of laughingly said, you know, I went over there. I think I'm a smart guy. I figured I'd just figure out the solution and let them know what they needed to do. And I'm not sure I came home with a solution, but I did ask a lot of questions when I was there. And one of the questions I asked is interesting because it's very appropriate or opportune now. I ask everybody. I ask Netanyahu. I ask King Abdullah. I asked Abbas. I said, can there be a separate peace? Can there be a peace with the Palestinian Authority and not with Hamas? Because nobody really seems to be wanting to negotiate with someone who's attacking Israel. And they said, oh no, it has to be one peace. And that's what everybody told me. And I said, well, how can there be a peace process then if it has to be one peace and nobody's going to negotiate with Hamas because of their behavior? Nobody had an explanation. And so in the last month now we hear Hamas is joining the Palestinian Authority in a unity government. The interesting thing about this is that many of the news articles say that Hamas is joining because they're bankrupt and they're out of money. They want a bailout. Who do you think is going to be the bailout? The American sucker. The taxpayer is going to pay for this. And so I introduced something because it really upsets me to think that we're going to give American money to an organization that calls for the destruction of Israel. And so I said no. I said we shouldn't give any. But it's caused some division up there. Some in the pro-American Israel relations have said, oh no, we have to give them. We just, this is the opinion of a lot of people in Washington. You have to give foreign aid. You can never stop. And I said, well, if you're giving foreign aid to influence behavior, why wouldn't you attach conditions to it to say what, if Hamas wants to be part of unity government, they have to say they don't believe in the destruction of Israel. They're going to recognize Israel, and they're going to have a peaceful coexistence. I think that's the beginning of negotiations. And everybody said, oh, well, the rules are such they won't get it. Turns out there's a presidential waiver in it. And this president is likely to use waivers. He used one recently to release those 5 Taliban prisoners simply by saying, oh, it's national security. The same waiver exists in giving money to the Palestinian Authority. They can have a waiver if Hamas is part of the government, but they think it's in our national security interest to keep giving them money. And unfortunately, that's the view in Washington, is we always give money. The only thing consistent is we never want to let up on giving money. One, there's no money to give, it's borrowed. But two, I don't see giving money to people that are calling for the destruction of Israel.
Tell me a little bit about your fight to protect the life of the unborn and the unborn child. I mean, that's a big issue in evangelical communities, is that we want to protect life.
It's a big issue for me, and I tell people that really it's all about when life begins. I'm a physician. One of the things that I would do in my job is to go into the pediatric nursery, and I would examine babies that are 1-pound babies, looking in their eye to try to make sure that they didn't suffer from blindness from being born prematurely. And the interesting thing is when you're in the neonatal nursery and you got a 1-pound baby, everybody acknowledges that that baby has rights. The Bill of Rights applies to that baby and nobody can hurt that baby. It's a 1-pound baby. But a week before, even a full-term 7-pound baby has no rights according to the way people are looking at it. And I think that's a big mistake. So I've introduced legislation called the Life at Conception Act to define when life begins at conception. I've also probably co-sponsored 20 some odd pro-life bills. I have a 100% voting record for pro-life. But I also have taken the time to go to the March for Life, and I think when I was there, I was the only senator that showed up for the March for Life. And so I do think it's important because I think, and I'll often say in my speeches, that I don't think a civilization can long endure that doesn't respect the rights of the unborn.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Senator Paul. We really appreciate your time. God bless you.
Thank you.